All right, so today we're going to be talking about budgeting um, and kind of all the different aspects of it. And so the objective is to basically provide information as to how to manage your spending, as well as creating a realistic budget. And so all the information that we're presenting today was found on the Financial Consumer Agencies of Canada's Financial Basics Workshop. So they have a lot of great information spanning all different kinds of areas. We're going to be focusing on budgeting today, and I'll show you a few different ways to budget, as well as one of the resources that the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada has. It is a fantastic budget. I went through it myself last week. It is truly a really great resource if you don't have a budget yet. Um, but moving right along, so if you want to guess how many percentage of Canadian households use a budget right now, what would you say? If you were guessing 46%, you would be right. So 46% of Canadians say that they use some type of budget, and 93% of Canadians who have a budget say they stick to it. And so that's the really biggest thing, is just getting started and getting into that habit, because once you're in the habit of budgeting, it certainly makes things a lot easier across the board. I know it took me 3 tries to get in the habit of it, so it's not always a one and done, but it's certainly something that um, you can continue on, and it's totally worth it. So why is budgeting so important? So the biggest thing is that you want to know where your money is coming from, um, and it's your first step to being able to manage your money, which is really important once you have bills to pay, such as tuition, for example. And it's a lot of it is being conscious of where your money is. So where is it going out? Where is it coming in? Um, what's your cash flow like? And that allows you to plan for events. And when a friend is asking you, hey, I want to go out tonight, you want to join, you know that you can do that without stretching the budget. And then budget would also allow you to strategically plan your spending, and ensure that the important expenses are covered. And it also empowers you to save for things that you want, such as the big ticket purchases like a new computer, vehicles, etc. Perhaps a house down payment, or if you want to really just get rid of your student loans quick once you graduate, a budget is a really key aspect in making sure that you're able to do that stress-free. And so there's a few parts of a budget. One is the income, trying to figure out where is your money coming in. Another is expenses, where is your money going out? And then the difference between the two. So it's either a surplus or a deficit. Um, and we always wanting to get that into a surplus. And so we'll go through a few tricks and tips today as part of that. So as part of creating your budget, you really want to make sure that you know what you're spending each month. Typically, budgets are over a month, as that is the easiest way to plan your finances, but everyone has their own habits. And so it's important that we're always keeping a record of things that we're doing, so we can look back on it and make adjustments if needed. And so the first bit is determining your resources and expenses. That's the first step when it comes to getting started with a budget. You need to know what your expenses are. For example, food, housing and rent, tuition, and you also need to know what your resources are, so the money that you earn or are given. So this could be employment income if you have a summer job or working through the work-study program at Lakehead, scholarships, awards, bursaries, student loans. If a family member is giving you money, that would be considered income, basically anything you're getting. And then you also want to determine your priorities. So once we know exactly what um, type of budget you want to do, and what your income is, what your expenses are, then we can get to the next step, which is determine how do we want to prioritize our budget so that it works for us. There's a lot of different ways to do this. I found the two easy ways is to choose either needs versus wants. So to prioritize what you need to budget for as, do I absolutely need this for my survival? Is this critical? Or is this just a nice luxury to have that makes life better, but I could get rid of it if I needed to? The other way to budget is to use the fixed versus variable expenses model. And so basically anything that has to be paid in full by a certain date, um, every month, and it's not going to change on a month-to-month basis, would be considered a fixed expense. And anything that has fluctuations, so sometimes it's really high one month, sometimes it's lower another month, that would be considered variable expenses. So there are two really good ways to organize your budget. Some work for others better. I find myself, I'm more of a fixed versus variable expenses person. But when I was a student, I was using the needs versus wants model. So it also depends on where you are in life. Um, for needs versus wants, when identifying your needs, you want to consider what expenses are needs and which ones are wants. Easy enough to say, a little bit harder to do. And so, for example, when you think about needs, what do you absolutely need? An example would be tuition. You're going to need it every year if you want to be taking courses at Lakehead. Um, you would also want rent because you need a roof over your head. And you would also absolutely need to pay your utilities everywhere, everything from hydro to water if you have to pay that, to even internet, especially since things are online now. And then that you are comparing that to wants, which would be a new phone or just an upgraded data plan, or meal delivery. That's a huge killer. Or just as simple as a Netflix subscription. I know a lot of us, Netflix is all of our fun time when we're not studying. But at the end of the day, you can still survive without Netflix. And so that's an important distinction, is that even if something feels like it's really important to your lifestyle, um, it could still be a want, maybe a very important want that you would focus over other things, but just something to keep in mind as part of this model. It really wants you to be drilling down into what is actually key to my survival versus what is just a nice thing to have. Compare that with the fixed versus variable expenses model. So with this model, it's all about figuring out what expenses vary by month and what expenses are the same every single month and they're never going to change. And so, for example, fixed expenses would be tuition. You can budget that for every year. You'll know exactly what your tuition is going to be, and then you can break it up into 8 months to figure out how much you need to be saving per month. Your rent, that's never going to change. Your phone bill is typically never going to change unless you're on a pay-per-use plan, which are not that common these days, but some of you may have those. The variable expenses would be things that change from month to month that you have more control over. So groceries, for example, and food in general, you can adjust how much you're spending each month. Gas is another one, how much you're driving, and you can alter that. Textbooks, you need them for some courses. You can also find them used to try and lower that. It's a variable expense. You have some control over how much that income or that expense is going to be. So knowing what you spend is really key here. You want to get a real sense of your expenses, because if we don't know what we're spending on, then how can we possibly budget for what our costs are going to be? We're going to be just putting aside money completely blind, and the budget is likely going to fail. And so we want to be keeping either our receipts, which is a pretty old school method, but it does work if you like that kind of thing, as long as you remember to actually look at them afterwards. Recording every expense in a notebook or electronically. There's some really great budgeting software out there that we'll get into. A simple Google Sheet works great for this as well. They have an awesome template. Or reviewing bank and credit card statements. This is what I typically do because I don't like keeping receipts. It's certainly hard to keep organized sometimes. So just taking a look at your bank statement afterwards, even on like your phone app, is pretty easy. There's like services within different banks that have a online tracker that automatically tracks those expenses. So it's great for record keeping, but you still have to remember to look at it each month. And then noting irregular expenses like gifts, donations, vacations. So there are certain things that will come up that's not going to be every month. And so you want to total your expenses at the end of every month for those first 3 months, and that can give you a really good idea of what am I spending on a month basis. And it's a really good starting point. And you can go back pretty far in all of these records if you use banking, online banking. And so as part of this, the next step of the budget, so we talked about our income, we talked about our expenses, we've talked about how to prioritize what we want our budget to focus on, whether it's fixed versus variable or needs versus wants. And now we can get into the surplus and deficit, so the final piece of the budget. So the difference between the total monthly income and total monthly expenses. So a net surplus means that you're making more income than you're spending each month. This is where you want to be. It allows you to do a lot of things. And the net deficit, where your expenses are more than your income, you want this to be temporary. As a student, I would say that I would be shocked if any of you are in the net surplus right now. Hopefully you are, but there's definitely a probably very high likelihood that you are not. So it's all about building a plan as part of this budget, so that you know what you need to do once you graduate and start making more income than you would be right now, to be able to get yourself into a net surplus very quickly, so you can start paying off that debt. So when you're talking about budgeting, it's important to look beyond just balancing the expenses against income for the short term, because there is the long-term picture to think about. You need to save for if you want ongoing education, a mortgage, or just retirement in general. Saving, like starting that stuff in your 20s, is going to pay off huge when you're later on in life. Starting at 30, you're missing 10 years, and that's a very sizable difference. And we have other different things in Financial Literacy Month to talk about saving and investing later on, but we're just going to focus on budgeting right now. So let's put all of this into practice. So the FCAC budget planner, we have the link in the slideshow. Honestly, this is a fantastic starting place. I know when I first started trying to budget, it's really difficult to get started because you don't know all of the different types of things to put money into. I found the category sorting was just so much work. And so this is a really great resource because it already has the categories created for you. And so you don't have to think about what am I spending in like personal hygiene and all of this, and oh, I'm missing something. You don't have to think about any of it. It's already there, and you can just start plugging in numbers. So if you've never had a budget before, I'd highly recommend checking this out, because this gets rid of a lot of the busy work right away, and you can just start. And so as part of the putting the budget into practice, we want to figure out what the income would be. So the most common types of income as a student, you would have your student aid payments from OSAP. If you're engineering transfer students, you should be getting those shortly, which will cover your winter semester only. So that's a big part of it. And then you also have summer employment if you were working over the summer. I know with COVID, lots of us didn't have that opportunity. And so maybe that is instead money you got from CERB or CRSP. So any type of money like that, or if you have a work study position at Lakehead this year, that would be another area of income that you can start going through. And so the idea is that you want to give yourself a monthly allowance. So as a student, a lot of your income is not on every 2 weeks you're getting a solid paycheck. A lot of it is you're getting a huge pile of cash up front, and you have to make that last for 8 months or longer. And so I always recommend when students are budgeting is you have to think about it on a cash flow basis, and take that big pile of cash, figure out how long you can stretch it, So you know what you're spending money on a per month basis is. Otherwise, you're going to run out of cash 1 to 2 months before your next big deposit of cash is coming, whether it's through OSAP or through your summer job starting. And then you're not going to be in a great spot. And so planning ahead and just making sure that you're on top of things and you're able to stretch that pile of cash over the time it's needed is really important as a student. It's going to make your stress levels a lot lower. And the next side of putting the budget into practice is our expenses. So expenses like tuition, which is only due twice a year. So there's one big piece up front in August and one big piece up front in December or January if you're using student loans. So that's another area where you need to budget properly to make sure that you have that large pile of cash up front, and then the remainder can be stretched over the semester months. Textbooks and things like that, rent, food, personal products, internet and phone, hydro and water. And so these are the type of expenses that we're thinking of. What's coming out of my bank account every month or maybe every 3 to 4 months if it's big stuff like tuition. But is that everything? Are we accounting for everything right here? Because how many of you are using a laptop that's a few years old? I'd imagine it's more than a few of you. And you know that that laptop is not going to last forever. It would be irresponsible not to just assume that at some point in perhaps the near future, you are going to have to replace it. So if we're only budgeting for our like pretty often expenses, but we're not budgeting for some of these maintenance expenses, are we actually following our budget or are we budgeting the correct things? And so that's where the concept of true expenses comes in. So what are your real expenses? For example, a computer replacement. It could be 5 years from now, but if you start saving a little bit each month, right now, by the time your computer just dies on you and you need a quick replacement, you're going to have at least some type of pile of cash ready so you can quickly swap it out on the dime and you don't have to reach into your emergency fund, which is something we'll get into later. But that's an example of a true expense that applies to everyone. Another big one is car maintenance. You can pay your insurance and your gas and be completely ready, but you know your car is going to have to go into the shop at some point. You don't know when, but it's going to happen. So the idea is that you want to be budgeting for some of these true expenses as well so that you're prepared for the inevitable situation where you have things you have to pay for right away. You just don't know exactly when that's going to happen. All right, so we've done our expenses. We know what our income is. So let's put it all together in the budget and figure out what our surplus is. And so if you have a surplus, then it's very easy to figure out, okay, so the surplus, what can it be used for? So it can be used for fund money, savings, a down payment on a home potentially that you could use your savings for, or if you want to just pay off your student debt really quickly once you graduate, that's another way to use your savings. Or if you want to go on a vacation afterwards and just take a year to travel the world after COVID ends, that's totally another thing you could do. And so the surplus gives us flexibility. If you have a deficit by the time you've put everything together, that's where it's time to review your budget. Something's not adding up. We need to change our lifestyle in some way. It's hard. It's a lot easier said than done. But the other option is you start taking on unsustainable debt and it's just a downward spiral. So it's better just to be proactive, and that's what a budget allows us to do. It allows us to see where we're going months in advance so we can make adjustments. So managing your cost of living. If you have a deficit in the budget or you need ways to cut expenses, this is what you'll be wanting to do. If you have a surplus, it's always good to still continuing to look at your cost of living. Are you living outside of your means? Um, and if you had an extra 20, 50, or $100 a month, what could you do? It's a powerful amount of money on a per month basis. And so it's always worth reevaluating what we're spending money on, so that when we absolutely do need the money, even for something like a true expense, like a computer replacement, we at least have some set aside so that we're not stranded. So areas for saving. And so if you are in a position where like, I have a deficit, I need to figure out where I can save money, here's some really good ways to start in a processed manner. So the easiest way is to check your bills. We all have them, so you can try and spot mistakes and overcharges, pay less in late fees, interest, penalties, get errors corrected before it's too late. Oftentimes there's deadlines that you would have to hit, so it's always good to be continually checking every phone bill. Is everything all right? Every insurance bill. Is everything all right? And things like that. Reviewing the food costs. This is maybe a bit of an easier one if you don't want to be going through all your bills. Groceries, takeout, buying lunch. These add up fast. I can certainly tell you from experience. I'm sure I'm not alone in that. Eating breakfast out or even just getting that morning coffee really adds up, especially when you have to consider that if you were to make a coffee at home, it's 20 cents versus almost like $7 sometimes if you're going to Starbucks. Um, so it's definitely a huge expense that adds up really quickly. Um, Bringing lunch and just prepping meals is certainly makes a huge difference to your budget. I know the thing that started me kind of being able to get my lunch ready every morning was to just make a huge dinner that night and then just splitting it in two. It's a really easy way to always make sure that you have some sort of homemade food so you don't have to be spending $12 every lunch on fast food or wherever you're going. Um, for those of you who are doing that. Cook one big dish on weekends and freeze is another great way. If you've ever looked at meal prep websites, there are a ton of them. And then shop with a buddy to try and get discounts at supermarkets. So if you wanted to shop together and then split food, another really good way to do it. There's a lot of different places that offer bulk, Costco being the main one. And then plan meals and snacks in advance, which does make a really big difference on always having a plan so you're not tempted to go outside of your budget if it's something that you just don't have fund money for. And bring a list and buy only what you need. And so another big thing would be considering whether you need to own some sort of expensive appliance, a car, a latest high-tech gadget, a home. Do you need a MacBook, or is a $500 Acer gonna just work fine for you? These are the kind of questions that you always have to be asking just to make sure that you're not living outside of your means, because that's when the trouble starts. And you can also look at negotiating better plans, whether that's banking fees, services, telephone, or cell phone. This is a little bit harder because you're going to have to fight for yourself over the phone, but it is an option if you're looking for next steps if you really are in a deficit. So you can always ask service providers, how can I cut back on my monthly bills? Am I currently on any plans? Maybe there's a better plan available. Is there a time frame for this better deal? Can I bundle services to save money? If you were talking to your bank, you can ask them about the monthly service charges you're paying and see how you can get rid of those if you are paying some. How can you save more by doing banking online? Are you eligible for low fee deals as a student? There are a lot of different student deals that banks have. So I would certainly recommend reviewing your banking information to see if you're in one of those accounts, as that could save you a little bit of money there. And then, do you have a better plan for me? So there's different things you can do. It's not necessarily easy, but as we see here, how to cut $162 a month out of a budget. This may not apply to everyone. I know most of you have bus passes, in which case the transportation and the parking isn't necessarily a worry for you. And cell phone plans are often locked into 2-year contracts, so it's not necessarily super easy to break them, but it's something to consider and a way to get into it. And having a conversation even with your cell phone carrier is never a bad idea, even just to see what your options are. But definitely the biggest one is always the food. The food, if you're doing takeouts or deliveries like Skip the Dishes or DoorDash or something like that adds up really quick. And so avoiding impulse buying is a big one, because the idea is that if you're trying to stick to a budget, you want to be stopping spending money, and you want to figure out where the money is coming from. And that's what the budget allows you to do, is figure out, where am I spending money where I don't necessarily get anything out of it? Is it through online shopping or taking trips to the mall? Some people find it's really handy just to leave their credit cards at home and just pay with cash. It's an option. Um, or reduce the availability of credit on your credit card. You can always call your bank and just ask them, hey, can you reduce the credit for my credit card to, instead of $1,000, $500, for example. There's different things you can do. Or a really nice one is, if you're about to make a purchase and you're kind of hesitating, sleep on it, wait the next day. Do you still feel like you need to make that purchase? That one is certainly a really helpful one, and has saved me a lot of money, I must say. So there's different resources you can have access to. The two that I found were really good as starter resources is the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada Budget Planner. That's the one that Melanie had linked in the chat. Trust me, this one is phenomenal. I highly recommend it as just taking a look at it if you've never used a budgeting software before. It's free, which is the nice part, and it makes it really easy. You don't have to do all this prep work beforehand. If you prefer doing the more Excel route, then you can certainly use the Google Sheets budget template, which is available. That one's a really good one as well. It's already set up for you, so you just need to input stuff into it. The problem with that is that you do have to make your own categories. So it is going to take you a little bit of time to set up. The other budget allows you to get going right away. There is other paid software you can get as well, which is also good, but you do have to pay for it. I wouldn't recommend that as a student. I feel like it's not necessarily going to be helpful. There's so many free options that you can use that there's not really any sense of paying for something unless you really want to try it. In terms of other events that are coming up and other resources that you could always learn more about, I know we do have, out of a bunch of different events this month, to Saving Investing with financial planner Jeff Rock, and that's coming up on November 17th, as well as the Financial Literacy panel about managing financial stress, and different ways to cope and to kind of understand that. So both of those events are coming up as well. There's other events on managing credit and debt. So take a look on our website, but I'll leave it at that.